Hi. Hello and welcome. I'm Kayla Scribner, and this is my very first Friday reads. I keep on saying weeks, which is not correct, but we will improve in time if this works. I hope that you guys love this. This is something that I've seen a lot around the internet lately, especially on Greg from Supposedly Fun. I really like the idea of checking in weekly and kind of talking about what I've been reading and what I've been up to and all of this. So I hope this will be a very manageable way to talk about my books in a low stress way. First, I'm going to talk about the books that I read last week, and this is going to be in a section that I filmed last Saturday, and I will put the clip in here, and then I will come back and talk about the books that I'm reading this week. My absolute favorite thing is when I look better on camera than I do in person. I am having an incredibly painful day, but if I put dark lipstick on, the bags under my eyes become a lot less noticeable. Is really learning how to accent chronic pain. That's really what I'm aiming for in my life. I don't mean to be like so sarcastic and talking about pain all the time. It's just been really rough. Getting back into school, being exhausted all the time. Thanksgiving was a lot. I just feel like crawling into a ball and a hole, a very comfortable hole, and never leaving. But also, I want to do a lot, and also, I want to do school, and also, I want to catch up with people. But it is a Saturday right now. I am real tired. I've been listening to a few books, and I've been enjoying them, so that's good. I felt September was just a very hard time. I am a little worried about how my Victober is going to end up just because of how tired I am. Am I going to be able to read at all? I find as soon as I'm in a lot of pain and stuff, physically reading becomes so much harder. Even focusing on audiobooks, I read Noopiming today and it was real good. But I know that my brain wasn't at 100% while listening to it, and I regret that because it's a book that I want to listen to, but I also didn't want to stop listening to it because I don't want to stop reading when I'm not feeling well, because then I'm not reading, and reading is one of the things that peps me up. So last night I listened to Mary Ventura and The Ninth Kingdom, which is a story that was written in 1852 by Sylvia Plath. I think I can now say one of my favorite authors because I've read more than one of her books, but The Bell Jar is just a book that I absolutely love and adore, and it means so much to me, and this is a story that I thought was really well done. It kind of reminded me a little bit of Shirley Jackson and her writing, how we have the everyday horror behind stuff, and a lot of people take it as a metaphor for suicide, and I actually take her as a metaphor fleeing from suicide, but that could also be my hopefulness going into it. And then I read Indelicacy by Amina Kane twice last night. It was so good. I listened to it, and then I listened to it again, and it was just brilliant. In the blurb, it was compared to Emily Dickinson and a Victorian classic, and I understand why. It feels very timeless in the way that it's constructed. It reminded me a little bit of The Yellow Wallpaper, where she wants to write and she wants to do all of these things, and she's talking about how she calls it her study, but her husband calls her its sitting room, and how it's not that he just doesn't believe that women can write, he believes that she can't write, and that just hit me. Sexism is one thing, but it can be, when someone is so blatantly sexist, it's very easy to dismiss them. But when they're, demeaning or just the kind that I'm talking about, when it's just the disbelief and the quietness and its destructiveness to your soul. And I felt that a lot reading this story. I really, really loved it. I could read it a third time and I would love it. And she's talking about writing about art, which is something that I love to do. When she was a maid, and then she married this rich guy, and then she's kind of figuring out what she is. And she's not a completely likable character, but she also is a very entrancing character, and we know very, very little about her. And she has this relationship with the maid because she's trying to make friends with her because they're from similar states, but she doesn't get to be friends with them. And she has all of these different dynamics with women, and we talk about poverty and privilege and how we go between those and where women gets things. It's so brilliant. I could read it and reread it again and again. And I read a little bit of the Anthropocene Reviewed at the end of my house sitting, and that was really nice. I really love his stories, and I love the way that he looks at the universe. I think I will always feel that way about John Green's books, at least hopefully. And yeah, so even though I'm just real exhausted and tired, I am enjoying some books, and I wish I had more energy to talk about the books that I want to do. I am currently analyzing autofiction because Indelicacy really made me think about that and how we think of autofiction and where it kind of stems from and what power it has. Because I was really trying to navigate in my mind why I like autofiction. Because I have a very different life than the character of Victoria in Indelicacy, or, Edith in Luster, or all of these characters. I don't relate to them on a circumstantial level, but I do relate to them. And the way that I think autofiction speaks to me is because it's so authentic and real and close with the emotions that even if your life is so different, it's more about the emotions. And the writing in Indelicacy is so good. So yeah, hopefully that is a project that I will get done sometime in the next few months, but who knows. I tend to end up they tend to be a lot of work, and a lot of work is very difficult for me to do, which annoys me because I want to do all of these great videos and stuff like this on all of these subjects and really deep dive them, and it makes me so passionate, but I want to do it well, and being able to do things well with chronic pain is a lot. So we're gonna have some more compassion. I think I've been doing a little bit better at filming when I can rather than when I feel up to it, or like when I feel pristine, and I'm appreciating that. As you could probably tell, I was pretty stressed at the end of last week, so I ended up picking up this beautiful comic called Mamo, and this is an Australian artist from Australia. Her name is Miledge, and it is just wonderful and gorgeous. It is very low-key, like the art is beautiful. I have like a vlog that will be coming out with me just going through because I'm just like freaking out, and I'd had such a bad day and this brought so much joy to me. And I'm normally a fairly like intense reader, I would say. I tend toward like fairly dark, very bittersweet kind of very literary books, but this was just excellent and I have no complaints other than the plot. The plot was a little bit constructed. Like, you could definitely tell this was her very first time making a comic that was of her own creation. She had done some stuff for Marvel and DC before, but this was her first independent comic, and part of the like characterization, some of the dialogue was a little stiff, and some of the decisions were a little bit like, okay, but why are they making the decision? And it's definitely geared toward a younger group, and I can definitely have compassion because the art was great and just overall the vibe was really great. So even though I wouldn't say that this will hold up to the highest critique, I think it was a lovely experience. And I'm only 2 issues in right now, so I can't really judge on the whole grasp of the story. And then on Thursday I read Chesire Crossing, which is by Andy Weir. Yes, you know that guy who wrote The Martian and Hail Mary and all of this like really hard sci-fi? Yeah, back in 2006, like 10 years before that, he wrote this comic about these 3 girls, so Dorothy, Alice, and Wendy, and their magical experiences in magical worlds. And he made it and put it up on his quote-unquote crappy website. And then when he became famous, they're like, you know, we should milk this cow. We should really publish this. But, you know, he's not a very good drawer, so maybe we'll get Sarah Scribbles to join in them. And she has actually really gorgeous art, too. So in the preface, he talks about how much he loves fan fiction and stuff like that. And I've never been a huge fan of fan fiction because I love canon a little bit too much. Like, I'm the kind of person who can't even enjoy, like, historical fiction because if it involves real people, I just cringe so much. I'm like, but they didn't know that, or who knows what they thought, and I don't know why it stresses me out so much. So for that reason, I've never been a huge fan of fan fiction, so I've never really gone into that space, but I really do admire it from the point of view of like reworking how other things can work together, and from that point, but it did a really good job of thinking about how Wendy and Alice and Dorothy would really interact together as characters, and how their magic systems would work together, and how like their systems of work and how things would overlay. My favorite part was that Peter Pan went to Wonderland and drank the thing that made him bigger, but it actually made him grow up. And to quote him, his first thing out of his mouth is, "Why do I find you so interesting now? I think I want to hug you. What am I supposed to do with all of these feelings?" And it's very innocent, and I really appreciate that, and like how things interact, or like how do the silver slippers interact. Like, they're actually just a conduit of magic, so Dorothy already has the ability to transfer through worlds, and then like Wendy has the power to fly, and Alice has the power to go through things through surfaces. And I really enjoyed this, and it was very interesting and unique in the way that Andy Weir chose to integrate these and collaborate them. However, the dialogue and some of the plot points were just so rough. Like, they did rework this in 2019 before they published it, but I don't think they went through at all for the dialogue. The dialogue was so bad. And like sometimes it was funny, but most of the time it was just really bad. Although the best thing was that they put Grace Poole in here. Also, none of the characters have any resemblance to their counterpart in fiction. Like, their personalities are completely supplanted by whichever plot that he wanted to have, which, you know, which is fine. Like, I heard some review say that like he clearly never read these books, but like the magic systems and the world stay the same, just the characters' personalities are totally different. And a lot of these girls just don't have a lot of personality other than like wide-eyed girl who comes and is like brave and strong and all of that. So making them like slightly different in their interpretations is perfectly fine. But Grace Poole, I'm assuming this is a Grace Poole. We actually only ever call her Poole. But we have the madhouse and the burning part, so I'm pretty sure that's what it is. And Grace Poole is the person who takes care of, you know, Bertha Martha. Grace Poole is the person who takes care of Bertha Mason in Jane Eyre, the mad woman in the attic, and is actually thought to be the mad woman. And she is like this middle-aged woman who drinks too much and is very sad, but also a little strict. And somehow she is transported into a kind of Mary Poppins really obsessed with English manners and society who can use magic and, get this, harness the power of evil children. Which, you know, I guess harnessing the power of sexism and assumptions about women was a little bit too dark for Andy Weir, but that would have been a little bit more aligned because Grace Poole was not a nanny. Also, if he was trying to channel Jane Eyre, he just did such a bad job. I can praise the way that he innovated while also saying that this was not the most fantastic story. I would be interested to read something that he did fantasy or a comic that he wrote, you know, today and not like 15 years ago. However, you know, it was interesting. It was interesting. I will say that. What Crossing really did was give me enough oomph to want to go back to books because I was like, okay, I can do this. I can do this. This was ridiculous and funny and I got to analyze it and it was lots. So then I picked up Velvet Was the Night by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. She's a Mexican Canadian author who I have enjoyed and I'm convinced I am going to love, even though this is only my second book and I hated her first book, but you know, Gods of Shadow and Smoke just sound so good that I have to know that I will love it one day when I read it. I just haven't read it yet. And this was really, really rich in culture. It was set in 1971 based on the Dirty War period in Mexican history. And it was really interesting about the collision of communism and capitalism and all of the things between different areas of Mexico in the 1970s. It really is taken from people who don't care about that but get involved. So we have our main character and she is a woman who is about to turn 30. She feels very disillusioned by this. She feels very sad about the fact that her mother is very favoritism to her younger sister, that she just feels very passed over by men and just she's a secretary and she doesn't really feel like her life has a lot of meaning or interest and stuff. And she cat sits for her neighbors and she does this to one woman who then seems to disappear and gets involved in this mostly because, you know, she needs the money to pay for her car, which, you know, is relatable. Meanwhile, we also follow Elvis, who is taking his name from the singer, the king. He is really intelligent but was kind of like kicked out of school and has never had a chance to really learn or make something of themselves. So he was selling arts and books and then is involved in, you know, gang life and cartel life. It's definitely a book that landed very middle of the road for me. Like, I really enjoyed it and I'm excited to read more Moreno-Garcia, but it wasn't necessarily like a book that completely wowed me. I felt very similarly about Velvet Was the Night than Astra, which was my next book by Cedar Bowers, and she is a Canadian book, and this is actually longlisted for the Scotia Giller Prize, which is one of Canada's most prestigious awards. I didn't know when I picked it up that it had already been eliminated and was not on the shortlist, but you know, I read it anyways. This is about a woman who grew up in a cult. We begin telling her story through different people in her life. So we begin with her father who did not want her. Like, he believes in the fact that like non-traditional families, non-traditional connections, which for him is more of an excuse to not really give anything about his daughter. So he sleeps with this woman who is considered quite young. That's one of the first things. Is I'm assuming he's in his 30s or so, and you know, the woman is in her 20s, and he knocks her up and then is like, yeah, no, I'm not really into this thing. I will not let you, you know, drag me into the capitalist thing, which, you know, we don't love capitalism, but also support your children. And then we jump ahead to when she's 7 years old and her neighbor who kind of lives near this commune really just sees her come in and they start to be friends and she starts being obsessive because she really, really, really wants a family. Like, her mother is dead and her father is not there. Like, he's like, you know, you can do anything, which means I'm not going to do anything for you. You have to fend yourself. And then we see her at 14 and how she's just like very sexualized and just very not given the protection of her family or father or love or acceptance, and kind of a lot of reflections on, even though social justice can say a lot of things that are positive, sometimes in movements men like to say they like equality and all of these things and yet still put the women in the kitchen and still put the women behind the things, even though they're saying equality, but they're not living out that. They want to break out of the systems that they feel oppress them, but they do not want to break out of the systems that oppress those around them. And I thought that was really obvious and evident. And then we continue on until she's in her 60s, and I really, really enjoyed it. I want to do a video that's comparative between this and Outline by Rachel Cusk, because both of them have kind of the inverse story, because in Outline we follow this woman who is not giving anything about herself but those around her, and this one we're having a woman who is not giving any of her own points of view, but those around her are kind of weighing in on who she is, and yet we're also seeing her trauma underneath. And I thought it was really, really well done. It's not a book that will ever probably be like the top of my favorites. It was incredibly heavy. There's a lot of trigger warnings for this. And then from Astra, I wanted to continue on my prize-winning books that I want to read, and the next one I read was A Passage North, which is one I'm still in the middle of. This is a book about a man who missed the civil war in India and the kind of genocide of the Tamil people, and now he's kind of going back and having reckoning with it and a lot of analysis and his relationship with an activist, and it's just very reflective, which is something that I normally love, but we're not getting the depth that I would like. We're getting more interpersonal dynamics than intra, like person within person, rather than person versus person. And I think because of that, it falls a lot of flat because we're not getting a lot of the other characters or a lot of getting scenes around it. The scenes that are just of like his grandmother or his lover or things like that are very reflective, but because it's not completely internal and it's not completely outernal, and there isn't enough outernal to really make a story, and there isn't enough internal to really carry and compel the story, I'm left with a lack. Like, I want to love it, but I'm not feeling a strong connection while also enjoying it. I think that this is going to be a very solid 3-star, very interesting 3-star, but not a 3-star that is really compelling me in any way. This is probably being quite a long video, but I had a lot of thoughts on these. So the last few books that I am trying to read and I'm in the middle of is A Woman in White. This is by Wilkie Collins. This is one of my Victober books. I've not been doing Victober like I wish I would be. I feel like I've been kind of all over the place, and this is 25 hours long. I am about 14 and a half hours in, so more than halfway. I just don't feel very compelled to pick this up. It's one of those books that I find it very interesting every time I pick it up, but I'm not very compelled to read it, and I don't really know why. And between Mamo and Crossing, I picked up Magic from Marigold because I was just not feeling well and I was exhausted, and it's not a great week. So I picked this up, and this is Lucy Montgomery, is one of her lesser known books, and is just wonderful. She is definitely one of my favorite authors, and I like keeping her books for when I'm having a little bit of like I like keeping her books for when I'm not doing well, and then they're just like home, like I just breathe them in, and the writing especially is just so funny, and the way that she talks about characters, the way that she characterizes family, it's just really funny, especially in her books. Like outside of Anne, like Anne is great, but I found like her other books really great for the community that they evoke, and I really want to read this throughout the next thing, and I'm just enjoying it already. I've underlined and smiled, and it really made me want to go and read other books, but I want to go back and finish this as well. Thank you so much for bearing with me during this Friday reads. I hope that you enjoyed me talking about these books, and let me know what you've been reading in the last week or two, and have a great time, and I will see you next time. Bye.